There is no love more dangerous than that of a man convinced of his own absolute righteousness. Look closely at that tray. Those teeth are healthy. They are white. They are perfect. They belong to a young boy who trusts the man holding the pliers with his life. But Dr. Henry Cotton does not see his son sitting in that chair. He sees a dirty vessel. He sees an incubator for invisible demons. And he has decided, with the cold precision of the steel he wields, that to save his firstborn soul, he must first butcher his smile. To understand how a loving father becomes the executioner of his own blood, we must first descend into the place where his nightmares were born. Close your eyes and imagine the smell. This isn't the sterile antiseptic scent of a modern hospital. This is 1907, inside the halls of Trenton State Hospital in New Jersey. The air here is thick, almost solid. It reeks of stale urine fermenting in old wood, the sweat of 1,000 bodies packed without ventilation, and above all, it smells of biological despair. In that era, an asylum was not a place of healing, it was a landfill. Society swept its imbeciles, its lunatics, and its hysterics under the rug of these Victorian buildings, waiting for winter or tuberculosis to do the dirty work. The doctors were mere jailers with heavy keys, resigned men who believed madness was a moral defect, a stain on the soul, or a hereditary curse that could not be fought. But then, the double oak doors swung open, and the light walked in. Henry Andrews Cotton. He was 31. He was handsome, with a square jaw that radiated authority and eyes that burned with the fire of scientific certainty. He had trained at the prestigious Johns Hopkins University, the mecca of modern medicine. He walked through the filth of Trenton in an immaculate white coat, like an angel of asepsis descending into purgatory. Cotton didn't look at the patients chained to the walls and see lost souls. He was a man of science, a disciple of the 20th century's new religion, bacteriology. Pasteur and Koch had just proven that invisible monsters, bacteria, caused physical diseases. Syphilis, a bacterial infection, could devour the brain and cause madness. Cotton's logic blossomed with lethal elegance. If syphilis is an infection that drives people insane, why not schizophrenia? Why not manic depression? For Henry Cotton, the mind did not exist. Suicidal thoughts, hallucinations, catatonia, these were not psychological problems. They were symptoms of toxicity. His patients weren't crazy, they were poisoned. He firmly believed that somewhere dark and damp within their bodies, a hidden infection was pumping toxins into the bloodstream, and those toxins were traveling to the brain, corroding reason itself. It was an intoxicating idea. It was a quintessentially American idea. It meant that madness wasn't destiny, it was a mechanical problem. Like a car with a dirty filter. If you found the filth and removed it, the patient would heal. Cotton abolished straitjackets. He removed the chains. He introduced hygiene. Families adored him. Finally, someone wasn't telling them their children were cursed, but that they were sick, and that he could fix them. But Cotton's obsession needed a culprit. He needed to find the focus of the infection. And one day, peering into the mouths of his patients, he had his eureka moment. He saw inflamed gums. He saw cavities. He saw impacted wisdom teeth. And he decided, with the arrogance of a man who believes himself a microscopic god, that the root of all human evil was hiding in the teeth. Focal sepsis became his dogma. The mouth was dirty. The mouth was the gateway. And so, under the banner of progress and compassion, Dr. Henry Cotton ordered the dental clinic to be opened. He didn't know he was opening a torture chamber. The cleansing was about to begin. And cleansing, by definition, requires the removal of everything that doesn't belong. The Trenton Dental Clinic ceased to be a medical office and became an industrial assembly line. There were no nuanced diagnoses, no x-rays searching for specific cavities. To Cotton, a suspicious tooth was an enemy, and a healthy tooth was simply an enemy that knew how to hide better. The order was absolute. When in doubt, pull it out. Imagine the soundtrack of those mornings in the asylum. It wasn't screaming, not at first. It was the sound of metal against calcium. The dry crack of roots yielding to leverage. And then, the rhythmic, almost musical chinking of teeth hitting stainless steel buckets. thousands of teeth. Mounds of human enamel accumulating like white gravel in the hospital basements. Patients who walked in chewing on their own doubts walked out with their mouths turned into caves of bleeding gums and phantom pain. Cotton proclaimed success. He announced cure rates of 85%. The world applauded. The press called it the miracle of Trenton. Doctors from Europe crossed the ocean to see the wizard who cured schizophrenia with dental forceps. But biology is stubborn, and madness is silent. Many patients, now toothless and traumatized, still heard voices. They still stared at the wall in catatonic states. The cure wasn't working. A normal man would have doubted his theory. But Henry Cotton was not a normal man, he was a fanatic. And for the fanatic, the failure is never in the idea, the failure lies in not having gone far enough. If the infection wasn't in the teeth, Cotton reasoned, it must have migrated. It must have taken refuge deeper, in the dark crypts of anatomy, fleeing his purifying scalpel. So began the visceral witch hunt. First, it was the tonsils, ripped out by the thousands. Then the sinuses, drained and scraped. But the demons persisted. So, Cotton's gaze descended. It went down the throat, past the stomach, and settled on the dirty, bacterial labyrinth of the guts, the colon. This is 1918. Antibiotics do not exist. Opening a human abdomen is playing Russian roulette with 5 rounds in the chamber. Abdominal surgery was an act of extreme violence, reserved for life or death emergencies. Cotton made it routine. Young men and women, committed perhaps for mild postpartum melancholy or juvenile anxiety, were strapped to the table. Their bellies were sliced wide open. Cotton extracted yards of intestine. He ripped out spleens. In women, he sought the filth in the reproductive system, ovaries, fallopian tubes, entire uteruses were excised under the suspicion of harboring madness. The patients didn't leave cured, they left hollowed out. Empty shells. Ragdolls stitched up in haste. The mortality rate skyrocketed. 30% of his patients died from the surgery. Nearly half the people Cotton touched ended up in a canvas bag before their stitches could heal. They died screaming of peritonitis, bellies swollen and hard as stone, devoured by the very bacteria the doctors swore he was fighting. And what did the great Savior say in the face of this mountain of corpses? His response is perhaps the most terrifying part of this story. Cotton looked at the bodies and didn't see failure. He saw confirmation. We arrived too late, he wrote in his notes. The infection was already systemic. Or worse, with a logic that chills the blood, the patient has died, yes. But he died cured of his psychosis.
You can't just embarrass yourself.
For Henry Cotton, a sane corpse was an acceptable clinical outcome. The butchery continued for years, protected by the prestige of his name and the complicit silence of a society that preferred its madmen dead rather than loud. It is tempting to think of Henry Cotton as a cartoon villain, a sadist who enjoyed the pain of others. But the reality is far more unsettling. The most dangerous monsters aren't those who wish to do harm, they are the ones willing to destroy the world in order to save it. Cotton was a devout believer in his own lie. And a true believer makes no exceptions. Not even for his own blood. Cotton lived in a stately mansion on the hospital grounds, surrounded by his wife and 2 sons, Henry Jr. and Andrew. They were the picture-perfect American family. But Cotton didn't view his family with the eyes of a father, he viewed them with the eyes of a clinician. He began to monitor their smiles, to scrutinize their breath. Any sign of fatigue in his wife, any teenage rebellion in his sons, was not daily life. It was a symptom. The infection was lurking in his own home. He didn't wait for them to get sick. He decided to act preventatively. First, it was his wife. Convinced her teeth harbored latent dangers, he took her to the clinic and ripped out her dentition. Then, his children. Imagine the psychological betrayal. The father who sits you in the chair, tells you he loves you, and then mutilates you. He pulled his healthy children's teeth like a gardener pruning a rosebush so it might grow better. But for Henry Jr., the eldest son, the sacrifice didn't end in the mouth. Years later, when the young man showed signs of emotional instability, His father knew exactly what to do. There was no therapy. There was no listening. Cotton cut open his firstborn's abdomen. He removed a large portion of his colon. He searched for the phantom infection among the guts of his own heir, convinced that by emptying him out, he would fill him with peace. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the institution, the truth was trying to surface. A brilliant young psychiatrist named Phyllis Greenacre was sent to Trenton. Her mission was to validate Cotton's miracle with rigorous statistics. But what Greenacre found was no miracle. It was a slaughterhouse. She discovered that patients weren't being cured, they were dying, or they were left so traumatized they stopped complaining. She discovered the records were forged. Greenacre wrote a devastating report. She exposed the butchery. She put the truth on paper. The theory of focal sepsis was a deadly fraud. What did the medical community do? Did they stop Cotton? Did they put him on trial? No. Adolf Meyer, the most famous psychiatrist in America and Cotton's mentor, read the report and buried it. The reputation of psychiatry was more important than the lives of the patients. The Greenacre report was hidden in a dark drawer. Cotton was allowed to keep cutting, keep pulling, keep killing, protected by the silence of his peers. Because admitting that the genius of Trenton was a butcher meant admitting that modern psychiatry had been applauding a monster. In the end, Henry Cotton's cleansing worked, but not in the way he expected. He managed to eliminate his family's suffering, but only because he pushed them toward the only definitive cure that exists for human pain. Henry Jr., the son he disemboweled to save from sadness, took his own life years later. Andrew, his other son, also ended up committing suicide. Both escaped their father's scalpel using death as the only exit. Cotton's obsession didn't cleanse his lineage, it extinguished it. And the doctor? The architect of this cathedral of bones? Poetic justice is a comfort history rarely grants us. Henry Cotton didn't die in prison. He didn't die screaming in remorse. In 1933, he died suddenly of a heart attack at his social club, dressed in his finest suit, surrounded by admirers. He died convinced, to his very last beat, that he was a martyr of science. His obituary in the New York Times called him a pioneer. He was buried with honors, taking the absolute certainty of his own sanctity to the grave. After his death, the truth leaked out slowly, like pus from a poorly closed wound. His successors stopped the colectomies. They admitted in hushed tones that the cure rates were a lie. But the damage was done. Thousands of people walked through America toothless, colonless, organless, victims of a medical trend that confused mutilation with medicine. Today, the old Trenton Hospital still stands, watching over the city like a guilty sphinx. And contractors say that when they renovate the basements, they sometimes find things. Small fragments of white enamel embedded in the rotting wood of the floor. Baby teeth. Wisdom teeth. Remnants of a macabre harvest that lasted for decades. Henry Cotton was not an anomaly. He was a mirror. He represents that dark part of medicine, and of ourselves, that seeks simple, violent solutions to complex problems.